o ran y Cyngor Llyfrau i'r sesiwn arbennig yma. Mae'n bleser mawr gen i fod yma I ddathlu Gwobrau Tir Eleni. A very warm welcome to you all to this session, which is all about celebrating the Tir Children's Book Awards. I am Helga Krause, CEO of the Books Council. We have been celebrating these awards since 1976, so they are the oldest, longest-standing awards that honour and celebrate children's literature in Wales and about Wales. We have categories that cover Welsh language and English language, and with the English language in particular, we are always looking for that authentic Welsh dimension, with stories that are set in Wales, that celebrate Welsh culture, or that make a reference to Welsh culture. Bydd yna ffilmiau byr am yr awduron sydd wedi cyrraedd ar rhestr Gymraeg. Diolch yn fawr I Tinopolis am ei cefnogaeth. Thank you so much to Tinopolis for the wonderful films that were produced to announce the authors that have been shortlisted for the Welsh language categories. And following these, there will be a panel discussion with the English language shortlisted authors chaired by Megan Farr. And of course, these awards are here to celebrate authors and publishers and to recognise excellence and to give us an opportunity to celebrate literature that we all love. But at the heart of all of this is a desire and the hope to inspire young people to enjoy reading, and of course libraries play an absolutely crucial role in doing this. So to all the librarians out there, thank you so much for all that you are doing to helping us achieve our mission to make everyone, every child, every adult an ambitious and committed reader. A particular thank you from us to Cilib Cymru for their support, for sponsoring this award and for working in partnership with us. Thank you so much to the authors. Everything starts with you, and the publishers, of course, who add those magic touches, the editors and the designers that make those books the beautiful objects that they can be. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi I gyd.
Casia, Wiliam ydw I, awdur y llyfr Sara a Lleidr y Neidr.
Sara ydw I, gyda llaw Sara. Dwi'n byw mewn zoo, felly dwi'n gwybod bob dim am anifeiliaid.
Hwn di'r ail lyfr yng nghyfres Sara. Fel mae'r teitl yn esbonio, mae yna rhywun yn torri mewn i'r zoo ac yn dwyn Neidr werthfawr iawn, a mae rhaid I Sara a'i ffrindiau ddatrys y dirgelwch. Aethon ddwrnod y llyfr wrthos dwytha, ond eitha modd yn gweld gymaint o ferched bach di gwisgo fel Sara. Mae bod ar rhestr fer Ngwobrau Tir yn difon dipyn o sioc leni, dweud y gwir. Ar ôl ennill llynydd efo sŵ Sara, nes i'n dychmygu am eiliad bysa'r dilyniant ar y rhestr leni, felly dwi wrth fy modd.
Sioned Roberts ydw I a fi ydi awdures Gwag a nos.
Dydy byddigions byth yn edrach arna ni'n iawn. Maen nhw jyst yn gweld y plant y wyrcws, plant gwag y nos, tacla, gari dyms, cnafon, pethau budur, ler, twp.
Mae Gwag y nos yn nofel antur hanesyddol. Mae wedi cael ei gosod yn y flwyddyn 1867 a da ni'n dilyn stori Magi. Mae Magi wedi mynd I mewn I wyrcws Gwag y nos ac mae hi yn ferch benderfynol, mae'n rebel, a pan mae Magi yn gwneud pranc ofnadwy ddrwg yn erbyn Nurse Janet, ac ar ôl hynny, mae Nurse Janet yn dial. Felly dwi'n ei weld fel rhyw fath o girl power Victorianaidd. Hon di'n nofel gyntaf fi, ac dwi wrth y modd Gwag a nos ar y rhestr fer.
Hiw Aron ydw I, a fi yw awdur Gwil Garw ar Carchar Crisial.
Y Crisial nes I ffeindio mynydd y Crachod. Ti yw'r llais ryfedd, a'i ti sy'n rhoi'r pwerau yma I mi hefyd.
Mae'r llyfr yn dilyn anturiaethau arwr Celtaidd nôl yn yr oes efydd ac yn casglu angenfilod ar gyfer zoo bwystfilod. Ond dyw ddim y person mwyaf pwyllog ac yn anffodus mae dwpdra fe yn achosi I berygl enfawr cael ei ryddhau i'r byd. Dwi wrth y modd fod Gwil Garw ar rhestr fer Ngwobrau Tir Eleni, a mae'n ffantastig bod ni'r wobrau yma I ddathlu y gorau mewn llyfrau Cymraeg I blant, llyfrau gwreiddiol, a gobeithio bod yn dod â mwy o sylw i'r maes a bod pobl yn pigo lan llyfrau a darllen.
Elgan Rhys dwi, a dwi'n rheolwr golygydd creadigol ac un o awduron ar gyfres y 5.
Mae Ngwobrau dwi, a dwi'n cyd-awdur y trydydd nofel yn y gyfrol sef Anig.
Maen nhw'n herio ac yn harmoneiddio, yn llawen ac yn lleddf, yn ffrio, yn ffrindiau, mor doredig ar craciau yn y pafin ac mor berffaith ar blodau bychain sy'n tyfu allan ohonyn nhw.
So mae y 5 yn 5 nofel am 5 ffrind yn blwyddyn 11 wedi sgwennu gan 5 awdur a 5 cyd-awdur ifanc.
Mae'n sôn am iechyd meddwl, sôn am cwestiynu rhyw, am grefydd, am anabledd, ond dyn nhw ddim jyst yn Muslim, ddim jyst yn autistic. Maen nhw'n cymeriadau cyfoes a Chymraeg sydd yn ceisio ddarganfod pwy ydyn nhw.
Oedden ni'n cymryd risg, ac oedd y Lolfa'n cymryd risg efo ni i greu y 5. So mae'n gret jyst cael y cydnabyddiaeth am y gwaith caled i gyd.
Manon Steffan Ross dwi, a fi ydi awdur y nofel fi ac Aaron Ramsey.
Roedd hi wedi bod yn wythnos ddigon anodd rhwng popeth. Diolch byth fod yna bêl-droed ar ddyddiau Sadwrn.
Mae fi ac Aaron Ramsey yn nofel i blant hŷn am bêl-droed, ond hefyd am berthnasau sydd yn digwydd yn sgil diddordeb mewn pêl-droed. Mae Ngwobrau Tir na Nog wedi gwneud gymaint o wahaniaeth i ngyrfa i yn y gorffennol, a mae jyst cael cydnabyddiaeth o'r gwaith, ond hefyd y nofel yma, achos bod hi'n nofel nes i sgwennu yn ystod cyfnod y pandemig, oedd hi'n rhywle i fi ddengid, felly mae'n arbennig iawn i fi a dwi wedi gwirionu.
Elin Jones ydw i, a fi yw awdur hanes yn y tir, History Grounded, sydd mae'n debyg wedi cyrraedd rhestr fer Ngwobrau Tir na Nog leni.
Rhwng 1800 a 1900, newydodd rai y ddiwydiannau mawr Cymru olwg y wlad, ac mae ôl y diwydiannau hynny i weld yn glir heddiw.
Mae'r llyfr yn olren hanes Cymru o'r oes yr ogofau, yr hen oes y Carreg, lawr trwy'r canrifoedd hyd at heddi. A beth o'n i'n moyn yn y llyfr yma, bod plant yn cael gwybod beth oedd ei greiddiau nhw yn y tir yma. A mae'n rhyfeddol i fi, fod yn onest, bod y llyfr wedi cyrraedd rhestr fel Ngwobrau Tir na Nog. Ngwobrau sydd wedi gwneud cymryd dros y blynyddoedd i roi sylw i lyfrau hanes plant, a fi jyst mor falch ohono fe.
Bore da, and welcome to our panel event with the shortlisted authors of the English language category of the Tir na Nog Children's Book Awards 2022, which celebrate the best English language books with an authentic Welsh background for primary or secondary age children. I'm Megan Farr. I'm a PhD student researching the publishing industry in Wales, and joining us today we have Claire Fayers, who grew up in Newport and now lives in the Brecon Beacons with her husband and 2 cats. Claire is the author of The Accidental Pirates, Waterstone's Book of the Month and shortlisted for the Children's Book Awards, and Stormhound, which won the Tir na Nog Award in 2020. She's also the author of Welsh Fairy Tales, Myths and Legends, published by Scholastic, shortlisted for the Tir na Nog and nominated for the Carnegie Medal this year, and described by the Tir na Nog judges as a beautiful book packed full of wonderful, intriguing and exciting stories of Welsh fairy tales, myths and legends, retold with great humour and full of humour. Ifan Morgan Jones is a lecturer in journalism at Bangor University. He's worked as an editor for Gwag and is director of the news website Nation Cymru. Ifan is also a translator and writer and the author of the novels Igam Ogam, which won the Daniel Owen Memorial Prize at the National Eisteddfod in 2008, and Babel, which was the winner of the Welsh Language Book of the Year 2020. 10 Stories from Welsh History That Everyone Should Know, published by Dragon Press, has been described by the judges as a wonderful introduction to 10 key figures and events in the history of our country, with information presented in a very accessible and readable style, with eye-catching illustrations by Taylor Gwyn. Next up we have Jill Lewis, the author of a number of critically acclaimed novels about nature, including Skyhawk, One White Stilphin, both winners of the Green Earth Book Award, as well as Moon Bear, Gorilla Dawn, and Scarlet Ibis. A trained vet, her love of animals and the natural world plays a big part in her writing. And Jill currently lives in West Wales by the sea. Swan Song, published by Barrington Stoke, has been described by the judges as a beautiful and emotive book about the healing power of nature that, despite its lyrical and elegant gentleness, has a powerful message of hope and recovery. And last, but by no means least, we have Leslie Parr, who grew up in South Wales and now lives in Derby, England, with her husband. Leslie divides her time between writing stories, tutoring adults, and teaching at a primary school. Leslie graduated with distinction from Bath Spa University's MA in writing for young people, and her first novel, The Valley of Lost Secrets, published by Bloomsbury, has been longlisted for the Carnegie and is currently shortlisted for the Brantford Bows and UKLA Awards. Her book has been described by the judges as a gripping wartime drama set in the South Wales valleys, full of mystery and intrigue, but also kindness and friendship. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I have a few questions for you all. We'd love to hear more about your books. So my first question to you all is, could you tell us a little bit about where the initial idea came from for your books? And was it important from the outset to connect it so centrally to Wales? Claire, could you tell us a little bit, please, about...
Hi. Yeah, it actually started with Stormhound. The Stormhound was a mashup of Norse myth and Welsh legend. So I did a lot of research and reading for that. And I've always loved the big epic tales of gods and heroes and great big journeys across oceans. But I suddenly became fascinated with the tiny stories of just everyday life and everyday places. The sort of thing where you go to a place and somebody will point and say, oh, you see that mountain over by there? That's where the devil used to play cards with Giant Jack. And it's these tiny ones. And I started researching collections of these stories. I'll talk a bit about my research later. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with them, if anybody would be interested in them, how I could use them in another book. And then my agent came to me and said that Scholastic wanted a Welsh writer to do a collection of Welsh fairy tales for one of their classic series. Would I be interested? So I said, would I be interested? He said, yes, of course. And so, yeah, all that research I'd done already. It happened right at the start of lockdown as well, which was fantastic because I had like 3 or 4 months when everything was cancelled. And I just sat and immersed myself in the stories of Wales, writing my own versions of it.
Oh, fantastic.
So, yeah, it was a very happy time writing them.
Oh, sounds wonderful. Sounds lush. Oh, thank you. Ifan, tell us a little bit about your 10 stories from Welsh history.
Well, growing up, I had a book called What Every American Should Know About American History, and there were about sort of 100 little tidbits in that book about American history, and I was always quite fascinated dipping in and out of that book. And there was quite a lot of conversation a few years ago about the new national curriculum in Wales and what part history should play in that. And there was lots of strong feeling at the time that people had grown up not knowing the history of Wales because they'd been taught about the Tudors, the Second World War, and so on in school, but not that much that was kind of Wales specific in many ways. And I therefore went to Riley and I told them, would you be interested in publishing this kind of book that was essentially just kind of a top 10 of interesting things that happened in Welsh history, and they were very keen on the idea, which I was very pleased about. And then I found myself, it's always great when you go to publisher and have an idea for a book, and it's then a little bit scary when they turn around and say that they actually want the book, because I'd never written anything non-fiction before. I'd written 4 or 5 novels, nothing historical. I had done a PhD into 19th century Welsh history, so I had a bit of background in kind of historical research, but none in kind of medieval sources and so on. But it was a very interesting process putting the book together, and not just what I included what I had to leave out as well was the most difficult task, because I could only, of course, include 10 stories.
Yes, that must have been really tough. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that a bit later as well. Jill, how about you?
Yes, well, I think my idea really started when I was just thinking about the huge pressures that are put upon young people today, especially going through that transition from primary to secondary school, and really thinking about, there is a big mental health crisis. And I was thinking back to my own teenage years, and I can't say I had happy years at my secondary school. So I was thinking, well, where did I feel happy when I was a teenager? And my dad grew up in Pencloud in the Garw when he was a boy, and he always kept a little boat at Bury Port. And so instead of having a caravan, we would always go as a family to Bury Port, and we'd go out onto the Lyfrau estuary and spend the night out on the estuary. And that was really where I think I just had that moment of peace and calm, just to look at the stars, look at the sea, everything slowed down. And I think there were fewer pressures on teenagers when I was growing up. I think there are huge pressures now. And so I thought, well, that's where I want to set the book, because this is where I know this place. This is where I remember feeling calm and having headspace. So that's why Swan Song is set in an estuary, a non-specific estuary, but in my mind it's the Lyfrau estuary in Wales.
Fabulous, thank you. Leslie, tell us a little bit about your book.
The idea for the story was sparked by a real life event. So my main character, Jimmy, he finds a human skull in a hollow tree. And in 1943, in the West Midlands, in England, children really did find a human skull in a hollow tree. And it's still a mystery to this day. It's sort of known as the mystery of Bella in the Witch Elm. And it's kind of famous, a bit sort of turned into folklore in itself. And I just took that idea, that spark, and it just seemed natural to me to set it in Wales, because obviously that's where I'm from. So it's in a fictionalised version of a real mining, what is now, sadly, as they all are, ex-mining villages. And I wanted my children, my main characters, to be displaced, if you like. So I wanted to, and it just felt natural. I'd never planned on writing historical at all. I was actually writing it in response to a writing task on the MA that I did, and it just all sort of fell into place. And I had tried to write things before, but they'd never worked, and I know now it's because I wasn't really writing through my experiences and writing about people and communities, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, that I know. So to take Jimmy and his little brother Ronnie and Florence, and they were evacuated from London, and to put them in a place was a way for me to introduce people who aren't Welsh into that kind of community, because even though it's set in 1939, it's not massively different now. And it was really important for me to set it in a very working class industrial place. So I'm from a steel town, I'm from Port Talbot, but this is a mining town. So that was something else I really wanted to do. And I found that that was the key for me to be able to become a better writer, I think.
Wow. Fantastic. Yes, there's a lot of history of bringing characters into Wales and seeing Wales through other people's eyes. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn to Claire and Ifan now, just to have a little chat about their books on the non-fiction sort of side of the shortlist. So Claire, could you tell us a little bit about how you came to select these stories? Was this a difficult task?
Yes,
yeah, I can imagine.
Yes, it really was. So yes, with the length of the book, I was going to be allowed sort of between about 15 and 20 stories were wanted for the book. So obviously, first of all, I had to bring the big guns out, which means the Mabinogion, which is the part of the oldest prose collection of British writing and contains some of the oldest myths and legends of Wales. So there are several retellings of stories from the Mabinogion in the book. But then the interesting ones, the non-obvious stories, which are the small stories. Now, the The Mabinogion was translated by a woman called Lady Charlotte Guest, who was an English woman who married the MP for Merthyr and moved to Merthyr in the 19th century. And she became fascinated with Welsh culture and language. And she made the best known at the time translation of the Mabinogion, and the one that survived for about 100 years as the standard edition before we got more editions in. And through learning about her and looking at her life, I discovered all these other Victorian people who were equally fascinated with Wales. And there were several gentlemen who basically must have had independent money, because they seemed to spend an awful lot of time just travelling around the country, talking to people and recording their stories. There's a pair of Americans, there's Wirt Sykes and William Elliot Griffiths, who, despite his very Welsh-sounding name, was actually from the States. And they came over and made collections of Welsh folklore and stories. The Reverend Elias Owen was a really interesting man, but he was a headmaster as well as a reverend and a school inspector. And he used to go around and visit different schools across Wales. And whenever he turned up in a new town, he would go to whoever he was staying with and just ask them to introduce him to the oldest person in the town. And then he would just go have a cup of tea with them, listen to all their stories, write them all down. And he's got the most fascinating collection of stories that have just been passed down through generations and finally recorded by him, which could well have been lost if he hadn't written them down. And then finally, William Jenkin Thomas, who, Ifan's already said about writing the history book for children, because the children don't know the stories from Welsh history. William Jenkin Thomas was a headmaster in Aberdare at the beginning of the 20th century. And he found the same thing, that the fairy tale books in the school were basically wearing out because the kids were reading them so much, but they didn't know any of the myths and legends from Wales. And when he asked them why, he said, well, no one had told them and there wasn't any book they could read. And so he wrote the Welsh Fairy Book, which he very helpfully put in quite a long introduction citing all of his sources so that I could go back and look through all of those and find them. So there's some really useful collections of these sort of lesser known tales that I really wanted to put in to introduce people to them.
Wow. And are they still in print out of interest, these other collections? Can people find them?
A lot of them are no longer in print, but thanks to the wonders of the internet nowadays, you can get most of them on Project Gutenberg and just download them to read them. And there was one other, I think my favourite bit of research in the whole book was my husband went on a conference up to Crisial Hall in Mid Wales once. And hanging on the wall in one of the rooms was this print of the first page of a story. And because he knows that I collect stories, he took a photo of it and sent it to me and said, what do you think of this? And it was a story called The Leaves That Hung But Never Grew. And it took me a good 6 or 7 months to actually track it down, because there's very few copies of it in existence. But sort of armed with my first page, I was working at Cardiff University in the library at the time, so we used their interlibrary loans system and sort of very sneakily put in a request for the book. Finally got a copy after many months. And it's a collection of Welsh Romany tales by John Sampson, which has been out of print for like 100 years or more. And I got this very battered copy with strict instructions not to damage it anymore and read through them. And the stories in them are great. They're very obviously meant to be told aloud. And in quite a few, it seems that at some point it might have started raining, because you get to a point where it says, and then they all lived happily ever after the end. It's almost like they're very long, involved tales with loads of different characters coming in and out and threads that don't go anywhere. And quite often very sudden endings. So yes, I took it, tidied it up a bit and put it in, because I think it's a great story. It deserves to be known.
Absolutely. And that's amazing. So now we've got, sort of children today can now read these stories which otherwise have been lost or hidden away after all these years. Wonderful. Ifan, how about you? Can you tell us a little bit about how you selected the 10 stories you mentioned before, how difficult that was in your collection?
Yes, it was quite a difficult task because there were a large number of stories I would have liked to include, but I promised to cut them down to the 10 stories. So I did cheat a little bit because the first thing I did was, before I started on the book, was I went on social media. I went on Twitter, and I have a number of academically minded followers, and I essentially asked if you were writing a book about 10 interesting things in Welsh history for children, which stories would you include? And from that, there were a few stories that just came up again and again, and I collated a list essentially of about sort of 25 stories I thought were particularly interesting and would be interesting for children. And then essentially it was a matter of perhaps looking at some stories I thought that they would be likely to come across anyway, such as the Merched Beca destroying the toll booths in Carmarthen, for instance. I thought they're likely to hear some of these stories anyway, so perhaps I can kind of leave some of them out and perhaps include a few that they were less likely to come across. One thing I was quite keen on was that it wasn't a kind of nationalistic kind of celebration of Welsh history, the kind of highlights of Welsh history. I wanted to include some darker moments in there as well, such as the race riots, and make the point that there are lessons to learn from our history as well, so that we don't repeat them in the future. And I wanted to kind of cast a more critical eye on some elements of our history that perhaps had been celebrated in the past. For instance, Black Bart, the pirate from Pembrokeshire, the treatment of him in Welsh history and literature has been sort of very positive and perhaps, great, he's a pirate, this is very exciting and so on. But he was involved in the kind of the slave trade and so on. So I wanted to explore the darker side of Welsh history as well. So, there were some elements of, not repeating yourself too much. There were elements of including female voices as well as male voices, voices from perhaps ethnic minority voices in Wales as well, and just making sure there was a good balance in there. I did have in the back of my mind, if the book was a success, perhaps there would be kind of a further 10 stories from Welsh history. So, when I had to make some difficult cuts and get rid of some of the stories I quite liked out of the book, I perhaps had that at the back of my mind as a kind of consolation. Perhaps I'd be able to do another book down the line sometimes.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Hopefully Riley is listening in. So both of you have used sort of brought in sort of readers on the back of some big stories, sort of familiar stories, and then brought in less familiar stories into the history and myths, which is wonderful to hear. And of course, with the new curriculum expanding, as you mentioned, the Welsh history and also diversity and inclusivity within Wales, and focusing on that. So these are invaluable resources. Thank you so much. And I will ask you really probably the hardest question. I don't know if you both can answer. If you do have a favourite story, Claire, from your collection.
Oh gosh, I think my favourite story changes every time I have to think of a favourite story. I do have rather a soft spot for the Afanc, which is the tale of a Welsh monster, which is sort of like a cross between the Loch Ness Monster and the Gruffalo, I think. Hides in the River Conwy and eats people in very bloodthirsty manners until a young girl finds out she can sing it to sleep, and then they drag it off and put it in a lake up in Snowdon somewhere. And I do rather like that monster.
I bet kids love it too. Ifan, do you have a particular story? I suppose it's different, obviously, for historical, but is there a particular story that you like the most?
I think my favourite story was perhaps the one I could include was the pirates, Black Bart. I think back to the because I have a great interest in the history of pirates anyway, and I like that whole time period, and I'm stories and pirate books such as Treasure Island and so forth. But putting that in a kind of in a Welsh context, but a historical Welsh context as well, where I found out some things about him that I hadn't heard before, and personally I'm could include that in the story as well. I'm also, as I said, I did my PhD in 19th century Welsh history, so the story of Nick Penderyn in Merthyr Tydfil as well, and his the protests there were very close to my heart as well. So I think those were my preferred stories in the collection.
Fabulous, thank you. Okay, so moving to the fiction side of our panel. Thank you for waiting so patiently, Leslie and Jill. So, as we mentioned earlier, your stories feature protagonists who move from urban settings to village life in Wales, and have shared themes of community, mental health, belonging, and family generations. I'd love to hear more about these themes and why you chose to write about them. Leslie, could we start with you, please?
Okay. I don't choose anything because I'm really not a planner, like not in the slightest. So I think they sort of chose me in a way. And as I mentioned before about how the story came out, I think it's a bit like that, in that I found out those things that I could reflect back on, and I didn't realise I was doing them till afterwards. So it's happened with I've got 2 books out so far, and it's happened with both of them. It's only when I've finished I'll look back and think, oh, there's that theme and that's come out and that's very me, and all those sorts of things. So it wasn't sort of, I never sit down and think of an issue or even an idea. Sometimes it just kind of happens. So, but because I'm very proud of where I come from, and I feel very strongly that family doesn't have to be blood. I feel that I wanted to show that all those things for my characters. So Jimmy's very resistant at first. He and his little brother Ronnie, they're taken in by a couple called Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, who are lovely. And Ronnie, he's only 6 and he settles very quickly with them, and he's very accepting. Whereas Jimmy's got very sort of, he knows they're kind, but he doesn't want to believe it. So he's very resistant, and he feels disloyal to his family back in Islington in London, where they're from. And incidentally, I chose Islington because I used to live there, and I love it. So I suppose, again, I didn't think I was doing these things till afterwards, but I've definitely done that thing, sort of write what you know, I suppose. So yeah, and then that sense of the theme of belonging that you mentioned, it is strong, because Florence in particular, who is the girl character, who is evacuated as well, but her and Jimmy aren't friends at all when they're in London. They become friends, and while Jimmy and Ronnie have got a nice family back in London, Florence hasn't at all. She's got an appalling family, and the family's got a dreadful reputation. So it's a fresh start for Florence, and it's a chance for her to really blossom. And that was, I think maybe I was trying to write a happy ending for her, because I've taught lots of children who you send them home at the end of the day and you can't fix anything for them. And that sounds really like a little bit cheesy, but you feel sad at some children's home lives. But with Florence, because I created her, I could give her that happy ending. And so she has a sense of belonging that happens almost instantly, because Phyllis takes her in and she cleans her up, and she gets her blue ribbon, which is hugely important to her. When we were talking about creating the cover, I said, Florence needs a blue ribbon. And the first time I saw the first draft of the cover, I cried when I saw her blue ribbon, because it was so important to her, such a symbol of her blossoming, as I say. And I feel that I was able to give Florence that. And a question that a lot of people ask me after they've read the book is, please tell me Florence is okay. Please tell me she doesn't go back to London. And in my mind, she doesn't. She never does. She stays. It's not in the story because it only happens over the course of a few weeks. But I gave that to Florence, and Jimmy takes a long time. It's about acceptance, and Jimmy takes a long time to accept that this is okay. This is a nice place to be. So that's the way I did it. But as I say, I don't sit down and think, oh, I'm going to write a book about this theme. It just comes out because I'm very character led, I think.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you. That's so interesting. And Jill, how about you? How did the themes develop within your story?
I think very similar to Leslie. I just know a kind of idea I want to develop, but I don't know how it's going to develop. But I think I knew with my character, Dylan, that I wanted him to be this boy who was just hurting inside, not really understanding why he was sort of feeling so depressed, but all those symptoms come out as real anger and troublemaking. So everyone sees this boy as just rude, a troublemaker, not very nice. And we start at the beginning of the story where he's kicked out of school, punching a boy after a series of events. So we see this angry troublemaker. And I sort of really wanted to put him in a place where he could flourish, and that was away from his school environment. And I think, especially in lockdown, because I write about nature, because I think in lockdown everyone's appreciated how much we really need space and time to think and to be surrounded by wild space, whether or not we can find that wild space in a city, which we can and should be able to do, or whether or not that's in the countryside. Everyone should have that opportunity. I knew I wanted to take Dylan to Wales, to an estuary, because I know that's one of the places that I loved when I was a teenager. So I wanted to show how Dylan could recover slowly, really, discover himself as well in this wild estuary. And I think when we're talking about belongings, it's a strange term, and it's a term which I often tread carefully, because there can be sort of different connotations of belonging, but belonging for me is often rooted in natural history and our wild places. And belonging for me feels secure when you know the swallow's going to return, when the chiff-chaffs come back, when the plants start emerging through the ground. And in swan song, it's when the hooper swans come back to Wales. And all those sort of things mean that everything's safe, everything's careful for another year. And it's that sort of anticipation. Will the swallows come back? Will there be as many? Will the hooper swans come back? And so for Dylan, he really loves the swans that his grandfather loves. And it's that when the swan fields are threatened, when their sort of roosting place, when their marshes are under threat, then that's when actually they see the future threatened. So I wanted to bring all those things in. And I think we've touched on community, which is really important. And I think community is really accepting people as they are. And in his school environment, he was pushed out. He wasn't good enough. Nobody saw the value in him. But in this community of people, they said, well, come along, sing. You don't have to sing very well. Just join in what we're doing. It's that being acceptance and being valued and see through that anger. So that was really important. And the other part of the story I loved writing about was this intergenerational relationship between Dylan and his grandfather. Because as Dylan has a rocky relationship with his mother at birth, and Dylan's mother had a rocky relationship with her father, who's Dylan's grandfather. But it just shows that sort of second generation can sometimes help with acceptance and not putting pressure on children as well. So I think that's how all those sort of themes come together. And like Leslie says, you suddenly think, oh, that's why I was writing that story.
And yeah, have you had much sort of, I can imagine these stories are hugely comforting to children as well. And have you had, out of interest, much feedback from readers for your stories?
Oh, sorry, go on. Jill, go first.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I've been working with one school which actually take children which have been expelled or off-rolled, and some of those children have sort of recognised themselves in Dylan and seen, actually, that's why I'm angry, that's why I'm so angry, but no one can see how much I'm hurting inside. And, if children can realise that, actually try and show to people, this is why I'm angry, don't get angry at me because I'm just expressing these symptoms of feeling sad as anger. I think that can be very helpful. Sorry, Leslie.
No, it's okay. I just think when you were talking about Dylan, I was thinking how lovely it is with that children, and I've written children like this as well, who, they're 12 or whatever age they may be, and they don't know why they're feeling the way they're feeling, so it comes out in the wrong way. And so with books like yours in particular, which really focus on it, a book should be just good stories at the end of the day, but it's important as well for children to see that, I think, and it helps the other people around them to recognise that as well, the other children, because when someone's your peer, you just think, oh, they're a pain. When you're a child, when you're an adult, you can look at it differently, can't you? So that's why I think it's great. With mine, I think two things sprang to mind when you asked that, Megan, and one was the surprise I had at how many grown-ups have fed back to me who have bought the book for their parents who were evacuated. And I've had a lot, quite a few messages like that, which have been really heartwarming and surprising. And one in particular, a woman contacted me through Instagram to say that her father was called Ronnie and evacuated when he was almost the same age as my Ronnie, and evacuated to Wales and met another girl who was 7, and they ended up getting married, and those are her grandparents.
Wow.
And then she said she'd bought it for them, and like the family were all reading it, and they were like, that's our Ronnie. And then a little while later she told me that her dad had died, but she said my book was now even more important to the family, and I thought that was like something I never would have expected. And the other thing, in terms of children, one of the loveliest things that's happened is there's a teacher called Beth Weeks. Hello, Beth, because you probably will be watching this at some point, in a school called Llwyn in Tonopandi, and she was the first teacher to make a display of the Value of Lost Secrets in the classroom, and she put it on social media, and they've now become my patron of reading school, because I just felt this connection with them, and it's an ex-mining community, and what the children had asked when the display went up before they'd read the book was, who lives in the houses that look like ours? And children don't often see these terraced houses. Like I grew up in a terraced house, and those sorts of things, and it really strikes you that, and nothing against them at all, but castles and stately homes and boarding schools, we have those stories all the time, which is great. But it really struck me that, gosh, these children, people talk a lot about children needing to see themselves in stories, and it's become a bit of a cliche, but it's true. And so those children could identify, oh, those places are like where we live. And that was a really lovely thing for me as well. And they went, oh, we've got to fill this, and we've got to, and it was sort of nice for me to think, oh, I got that bit right. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Must be amazing to get this feedback from readers. Claire and Ifan, I'd love to know if you've had a chance to have some feedback from teachers, children, readers using your books either in the classroom or at home. Ifan, do you want to maybe answer first?
Yes, I've had a lot of great feedback from parents saying that they've read the book with their own children. There's been a travelling group called Mount Cymeriad who have been going around Welsh schools and acting out some of the stories in the book and using the book as well, and they've been posting videos on social media of their events of the children reading the book and looking very enthusiastic about it. So it's very positive. But I know from experience that every child's different, because I've got 4 children, and 2 of them are kind of in the age for reading this book. And one of the children sort of devoured it in one sitting, and the other came up to me a few months later saying, oh, I have history homework, do you know anything about this topic? And I said, no, the book I gave you a few months ago, there's a whole double-page spread in that book about this very topic. So she obviously hadn't even opened up the book. So all children are different, but those children who have read the book, I think, I've had some very positive feedback. And I think what's great really is, I don't expect the book to be a kind of comprehensive guide to Welsh history, but if it can sort of spark something in the children's minds that kind of gives them a lifelong interest and appreciation of Welsh history, I think it'll be a job well done for the book, I think.
Fantastic. How about you, Claire?
Yeah, I've had loads of really lovely feedback. I've been spending the past few months actually doing library and school visits, so meeting loads of children. So we've had great displays of all the children's versions of the Afanc and their drawings. There's one school did a sort of a found poem, a blackout poem idea, where they just photocopied a page of the book, and then the children would colour in certain words, so leaving certain words on there visible and creating their own poems for the page, which was absolutely fantastic to see that.
Wow.
And so many of the children, I think so many people have said that they didn't know these stories. And now they're actually interested in looking at more stories themselves, which is great. I think it's one of the things that Ifan said then, I think, was your children knowing their local history and knowing their local stories and seeing themselves in the books again as well, that when kids think of myth and legend, often you think of Greek mythology or Norse or whatever, and it all happens in other places to other people, and you think that actually we've got a whole wealth of stories and legends and sort of magic and everything on our doorsteps, and it's just been great to see the kids tapping into that and coming up with their own versions of the stories.
Wonderful. No, yes, I think that's what these awards help, isn't it? Elevate and these books, out and sort of make people within Wales and outside of Wales aware of these wonderful books set in Wales, or about Wales. So I'd like to know a little bit, just moving on to maybe you as developing as readers and writers. And as I mentioned before, that this discussion will be shown at the Silip Wales Cymru conference online. And so I'd like you to maybe tell us a little bit about the importance of both reading for pleasure and libraries to yourselves as writers and readers, both as children, but also now. And you've touched on now about sort of promoting the books through libraries, etc., and research as well. So maybe, Claire, if we could start with you, you can tell us a little bit, please.
Yeah. Well, I used to work in a library before I actually went full-time as an author. So I can very safely say that libraries are the most fantastic places, and librarians are the loveliest people you will ever meet. I'm sort of contractually obliged to say that every time libraries are mentioned still. But it really is true. And as a child, the library was enormously important to me. And I grew up in Newport, of one of 4 kids with parents on benefits and no money to spare at all. So we had books in the house, but they were all sort of second-hand old ones. We certainly wouldn't have gone and bought new books. But my mother was a great reader. And every week she would take me down to the library, and just the sort of an hour or so I could spend there rummaging through everything and looking for stuff that looked interesting. So it was a chance to actually discover for myself the sorts of stories I loved and the sorts of things I didn't like as well. And that you could take home. My piles of books would grow every week. This stack I would take home, like would sort of teeter home like this, a big pile of books, and read them all the week, take them back, change them. I fell in love with Greek myths in the library. So I can still remember finding an illustrated copy of a Greek Legends for Children and seeing the picture of Perseus and things. I think, right, I want a flying horse. And so I think, yeah, I was maybe not so much thinking of becoming an author at that point, but the books really opened my eyes to the fact that the world was a lot bigger than I could see from day to day, and there was just so much out there to explore, and that the books made me want more. So I think they sort of pushed me up ambition-wise, made me want to actually get out and find out more about the world and achieve more. So I think that was really important. And now I think, one of the first things I did when I moved house up here to the Beacons was to, as soon as the libraries reopened, I was in wanting a ticket. And our village library is absolutely great. And I can order books from anywhere in Monmouthshire now and just have them delivered to the library down the road and go and pick them up. And it's the sort of place where I can go in. And the librarian sitting there and it's, oh, hi, Claire. Have you read this one? This is just coming. I think you'll like this. And in terms of reading, I think if I ever stopped reading for pleasure, I would probably stop writing, because my writing is just driven by a love of the stories. And if I ever lose that, I think I would lose the will to write as well.
Wow.
And so I just keep discovering new favourite authors all the time. We've got a book club in the library as well. I'll be going down there this afternoon after this video, actually, because we've got another discussion this afternoon about books.
Wonderful.
I really do depend very heavily on my library. And I'm very grateful for the work the librarians do.
Wonderful to hear. Thank you. So, Ifan, how about you?
Well, I'm extremely lucky library-wise, because I work here at Bangor University, and we have the Welsh Library here, which is, I think, one of the nicest libraries in Wales. It's like almost like a hobbit hole. It's got the kind of curved roof, and it's very cosy in there. And I think my kind of happy place whenever I'm writing anything is to just sit in the Welsh Library here, typing away. And if I want any inspiration, there's a whole shelf there on Welsh history. There's a whole shelf there on Welsh mythology and the Mabinogion and things like that. I can just stand up and pick up a book and start reading. And I think it is very much when you're writing, it's sort of reading is the fuel of writing, and it's kind of, you have to put words in to get words out as well. So I think that's very important. But I was extremely lucky growing up. I think in hindsight, you don't realise this at the time, but I grew up in a house where pretty much a wall in every room was essentially dominated by books, and there were essentially just books everywhere. My parents had written books, my grandparents had written books, so I was extremely lucky in that regard, just to grow up with books all around me, and I essentially spent my childhood sort of devouring sort of Tolkien and all the Terry Pratchett books and a range of sci-fi authors and things like that, which have continued to have a massive influence on me. So I think nothing will ever replace a book, I don't think, because we have always you have sort of Netflix and films and everything like that. The thing about books is that there's sort of gaps between the words as well, where people can insert their own imagination, and I think that no other medium really does that in the same way. So however much technology develops, I think the maximum pleasure you can have from any medium, I think, is picking up a good book and reading that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jill?
Well, I'm amazed by libraries. I just think libraries are these buildings which actually are necessary for democracy and an open society, and librarians are the guardians of that democracy. But I didn't always think that. As a child, I really struggled with reading. My mum was a real reader. We had books everywhere. But because as a child I couldn't read very well, I remember her taking me along to the library and feeling like I was in this room full of boxes that I didn't have the key to, and everyone else had the key, and somehow they found this magic in books and I couldn't find that magic. And I remember sort of turning my back on books, just feeling frustrated and feeling that it wasn't fair. And there weren't many graphic novels which I think I would have loved at the time. There was sort of Tintin, which I liked, and there was Asterix, and I loved those, but there weren't many more of those. So I sort of had this big vacuum in my life where I didn't read actually that many books or go to the library. And then it was really only in my later years as an adult, when I had children of my own, and I took them to the library when my daughter was sort of 18 months, and suddenly realised that she found, because obviously I could read by then, but she found that magic within the books, open these books, and we come back with more books. And it was just that real adventure that you go on a journey with your child when you're reading a book to them. And so really that's when my sort of real book reading and love of libraries started. And then as an author, I was sort of blown away by it, really. as an author, when you step into a school, if there's a library and a librarian in that school, because the moment you step into that school, there are books on the on the walls or displays of books. You'll have teachers who read a lot as well because they've been influenced by the librarian. And there's an energy about a school that's got a library and a librarian. And just the connections that librarians make between authors, illustrators, readers and parents, it's real magic. And I'd just like to thank every single librarian for making that magic.
Thank you, Jill. Leslie?
Do you know what I really miss is those little, because I was little in the 70s, so I miss the cardboard library cards and those little things you slot them into, and the children watching this now are going to be going, what are you talking about? But that like sensory experience, I think. I go to the library now and I've got my little plastic card and that's brilliant, but I just really miss that and the smell of it. So yeah, we had a nice library in Carnarvon, which is the village where I'm from. And I've got some really lovely memories of going there with my mother and my brother. And one of my nicest memories related to the library is that one day she took us up, and while we were in there choosing books, the heavens opened, like big shock in Wales, it rained. And it was raining so hard we couldn't even walk the sort of 5 minutes home. So we just would have been completely drenched. So we stayed there and I read a whole book. And I'm not a fast reader. Even now, I'm not a fast reader. It takes me ages to read things. And I read a whole book and I wish I knew what it was. I just know it was about a girl and a cat, which I can't exactly Google it. And I loved it. And that experience, I didn't even have to take the book out. I could get something else on my ticket because I'd finished it. And I think it was being with my mother as well. It was a lovely part of the memory, and my brother. And just, so there's that. That really sticks out for me from my childhood. And now I love using the library as a kind of a try before you buy thing, because writing historical, I love research. And I can look up and say, oh, how many books are there about, my main example is going to be from my second book, and we're not talking about it, but so I'll try and be a bit more general. But so there's topics that I want to look up, and there's sort of loads and loads of books, and textbooks are expensive, so I can order from the library, have a look, read a bit, see if it's got what I want in it, and then either keep it and use it, or if it's really valuable, then I buy it. And, I can't really afford, I remember once for some piece of research, I had 15 books, and I worked out how much it came to, and it was a few £100, and I wouldn't spend that in one go on books, because some of them didn't even turn out to be that useful to me. So I just think that for me as an adult, that's how I use the library most, is for non-fiction, really. I occasionally do the same with books, particularly adult books, if I'm not sure if I'm going to like this writer's style or something, because I like to own books, so I have to buy them. But I'll try it first, and if I like it after a few chapters, then I will buy it. So that's how I use my... And what I really like about the library where I live now is always busy. There's always people on... It's not very big, but there's always people on the computers. There's a real mixture of people, and you can tell from some of the people that they really need that. They might not be able to access the computer if they're looking for a job or something like that. So it's all these things beyond books. They get to see people, they get to talk to people, and it's all those things beyond books that libraries are so important for as well.
Absolutely, like the hubs of the community, aren't they? There aren't so many.
Yeah.
These days, sadly, but thank you. That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for all that wonderful information and passion for your writing and writing for your reaching your readers. It's been really enjoyable to find out more about your books today. Thank you, diolch yn fawr iawn, and thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks
for having me.
Thank you.
Nice to meet everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.